For those of you who have been watching since the revival of our channel in October, it should come as no surprise that we here at Frederator love us some Avatar. So why not take a look at the very best it has to offer? I'm Jeremy, and these are the top 7 best episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Number 7. The Tales of Ba Sing Se. And yes, we're starting with this one for 2 reasons. It's technically a filler episode, but it gives us something that is sorely needed in an epic adventure like this one. It broadens the characters. The reason this is so important is because it makes them feel more human, to show us that they aren't just concerned with fighting the Fire Nation and mastering the elements. There is more going on in their lives than that. Aang is still on the lookout for Appa, sure, but that doesn't mean he can't stop to help other animals, because that's his nature. Zuko is slowly coming around to life in Ba Sing Se not being so bad, and him going on a date with a girl makes that all the more believable. It's very rare for a show like this to take that kind of time and just let the characters be. It's a welcome breather after episodes that had major plot developments, and one last big action scene before they go into the city. And that's about as far as we can go without addressing the elephant in the room, the tale of Iroh. It's made all the more poignant by the fact that Iroh's voice actor passed away between books 2 and 3, and that this part of the episode was dedicated to him. But it's not just that, it's also pretty much the only part of the show to be truly Iroh-centric. Every time he features more prominently, the episodes are still largely focused on Zuko. This makes sense, but it's nice to have him finally get a proper segment all to himself. Not only that, but this is where we get a lot more insight into his character. While he generally has a very laid-back attitude, treating his journey around the world with Zuko almost more like an extended vacation than a desperate manhunt, this is where we get to see a side of him that we would otherwise never get to. A side that he likely never showed to anyone, maybe not even to Zuko. From the brief glimpses we get, Iroh always held a deep affection for Zuko, but now we see why Iroh went with him, because he didn't want to go through that kind of loss again. Maybe it's even as a replacement for his own son Lu-Ten, but that seems a bit selfish for a man like him. So with it being so interesting and such a tearjerker, why doesn't it score higher on the list? Stiff competition, obviously, but also because the tale of Iroh is the clear standout in terms of quality. The other segments are all good, but none of them quite reach that same level, so while it deserves to be mentioned, this is as high as it will go. Number 6. The Desert. This one, I believe, deserves to be on the list for a reason you might not expect. It really highlights the relationship between Aang and Appa and how important it is to him. Even with pretty much everyone he knew growing up being gone, Appa was still there for him. He was more than just a convenient mode of transport for Aang. He really was a great and loyal friend. So to lose him really puts Aang in a state, no pun intended, that we haven't really seen before. This is the only episode where Aang is genuinely scary, and it seemed like he was inches away from murdering someone. He is normally very attached to his values as an air nomad, but this episode demonstrates that even someone who is as much of a pacifist as Aang has a breaking point. Of course, this culminates in him going into the Avatar state, and it's probably the most tragic time this happens, especially because of the way he gets pulled out of it again. The fact that Katara has to hold him as a form of assurance, even though by right she should be just as scared as everyone else. It also gives Katara room to shine as the true moral center of the group, to try and keep them all alive. The other side of Appa being missing is simply practical, them being stuck in the middle of the desert following their adventure in the library. Also, cactus juice. It's the quenchiest! The other half of this episode, Iroh and Zuko's story where they start heading to Ba Sing Se as well, has some very clever storytelling of its own. It's great to see something that seemed like a throwaway joke at the time, the Lotus Tile, come back as a critical aspect of the plot. A timely reminder that no matter how small a detail seems to be in this show, you should never underestimate how important it can end up being. Number 5. The Avatar and the Fire Lord. The episode that was the most work according to the creators, and it shows. In an interview, they stated that because this episode visited so many locations, it had a ton of background artwork that needed to be done, and that turned out to be a disproportionate amount of work, and they still did it. Even though this episode mainly focuses around a minor character at best, it gives us so much background on both Aang and Zuko, and even the war and how it came to be. This has to be one of the most densely written episodes in the show. And yet, it's still extremely well paced. We follow these two men from the time they were teenagers until they were old men, and yet I don't really feel like anything important was skipped. Even Sozin gets a ton of characterization in this episode, because the creators knew it mattered. Incidentally, if anyone ever tells you a prequel will never work because we know how it turns out, point them at this episode. We know that Roku is going to die, and we know that Sozin will start the war and wipe out the air nomads, but we still get invested in their ultimately doomed friendship because it is simply well written. Also, there is something incredibly cool about watching a fully realized Avatar in action when they are at the height of their power. It worked for Kyoshi, and it definitely worked here for Roku. This one also holds one of the greatest bits of how to use the camera to tell your story, and it's in the final scene between Zuko and Iroh. Yes, this also applies to animation. Even though Iroh is the one in prison, he is always sitting in the light, while Zuko is shot sitting in the dark and while behind the bars. Iroh is exactly where he wants to be, while Zuko is the one who is really trapped. It's a brilliant bit of subtle storytelling and demonstrates the kind of attention to detail that few showrunners have, which earns it the number 5 spot on this list. Number 4, Zuko Alone. This one really highlights that the creators can and will go places that lesser shows won't. An entire episode that doesn't even mention the titular character of the show, and instead focusing entirely on the antagonist, ? This episode really goes into how Zuko came to be the person he is by this point. Not necessarily the motivation for why he is doing what he's doing, we'll get into that a little bit later, but what shaped him. The fact that his family is seriously messed up paints a pretty clear picture, of course, and just how deep the roots of his trauma run. It's also pretty disturbing to see that Azula has been a terrible person to everyone around her ever since she was a little girl. Though at least Zuko can take comfort in the notion that his own sister is trying to kill him isn't personal. It's not the flashiest of episodes. The only fight, Zuko wins with relative ease. The only reason he struggles is because he didn't want to use his firebending. And it's so brutal on him that when he actually does the right thing, free the people of this little town from the corrupt soldiers, he gets ostracized for it. And I think it's here that they really lay the foundation for Zuko choosing sides with Azula at the end of Book 2. Because no matter what he does, he always seems to lose. He stands up for the people of the Earth Kingdom and they reject him for it. And yet there's still honor in him. He could have robbed the pregnant couple, but he chooses not to. Great work by the designers, by the way, making his cheeks so hollow. He's built in Book 1, but this is him at his skinniest. A few weeks of barely eating will do that to a person. Just one more piece of attention to detail that earns Zuko Alone a spot on this list. Number 3, The Beach. You might be surprised to see this one snag the number 3 spot over Zuko Alone, but there is a good reason for it. That one was about background, but this one is about introspection. It's very rare to find a show that will dedicate basically an entire episode to give both the villain and the antagonists, again they are different, room to breathe. Going back to what I said about the Tales of Ba Sing Se, it humanizes them in a strange way. They are still teenagers and there is more than a single aspect to their personalities. Also, rather than just being about Zuko, it also gives us more background on Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee, which is a very welcome addition, especially with Azula. We definitely knew what she was like, but this is pretty much the only time we ever see her open up somewhat. Azula is always some kind of mixture between calculating and sadistic, but here you get the first real look at the fact that that is an exterior covering up a deeply troubled girl.
My own mother thought I was a monster.
It's only for a brief moment, but the fact that you get so much from the reading of a single line really speaks volumes to the quality of both the voice acting and the animators. She tries to cover it up with a joke, but even then, it's too sincere for us to be fooled. The B story, Team Avatar for a change, is pretty cool, as it provides the action almost entirely without music. Something you normally don't pay much attention to, the sound editing, really gets to shine here. The combustion beams just have so much impact, even if you were to look away from the screen, you can hear just how incredibly powerful it must be to produce that kind of noise. It's a great action scene to mix things up a little bit, even within the context of the show. But really, the scene around the campfire is what makes this episode so great, and it's what earns it the number 3 spot. Number 2, The Storm. With how much we've been talking about Zuko, it should come as no surprise that this episode ranks so high. The true brilliance of this episode lies in making us realize that Zuko and Aang are not enemies per se, they are just opposite sides of the same coin. Both of them are haunted by the mistakes of their past, and both of them are trying to make up for those. Right from the word go, Zuko had been a very atypical antagonist, as he was not after money or fame or glory like all of the other villains, he was after his honor. But now we understand him. It's also great to see just how much of an extra dimension they add to Aang by making it his own decision to run away. It wasn't an accident, he was actively running from his responsibilities. That might sound like a highway to making him more unlikable, but by this point in the show he is well underway to owning up to his responsibilities, so we can see that he is already trying to make amends, which is good. Then there is the usual list of details that make this episode so much richer and deeper. It's technically Azula's introduction, and they waste no time demonstrating that she is a brutal sadist. They lay the groundwork for how seriously messed up Zuko's relationship with his father is, and we also get to truly understand Aang's loss and why he feels so guilty about it, even though that guilt is probably misplaced. Survivor's guilt is a real condition, and it's very clear that he is not over it. It's also the first time we see Iroh bending lightning, and while it is kind of played for laughs, it's yet another small detail hinting at the fact that Iroh is a much more powerful firebender than he is letting on. The list of things that are great about this episode is way longer than we have room for, so suffice it to say, it deserves to be here. Number 1, Sozin's Comet. Is this cheating? Yeah, probably. So for the sake of technical correctness, I'll say the fourth one is the best. But really, you can't watch them individually. You have to sit down and watch all 4. It's such a complete experience, such a masterfully crafted finale to an amazing show, that even the bean counters over at Nickelodeon wouldn't dare to get in the way. The original deal was for a 3-episode finale, but when the creators turned over the script, it was plenty for 4 episodes. And Nickelodeon just gave them the money to make the extra episode, which is what gives their best show such a great finale, because truly that's what it is. There are many shows that have dragged on well past the point where everyone is thoroughly sick of it by the end. But by having the most amazing of finales, Avatar cemented itself into the mind of a generation. There is a reason that there are still creators here on YouTube making a living by talking about this show that's a decade and a half old, yours truly included. Apparently, some people have a problem with Aang taking away Fire Lord Ozai's bending, seeing it as a deus ex machina. But come on, it's been 3 seasons of non-stop magic. Surely a bit more by the end doesn't suddenly ruin your immersion. Plus, it's not like it comes completely out of thin air. Aang talks with all of his friends in his past lives for advice and is just about ready to sacrifice his own values for the sake of the world. We effectively have 3 finales at once, and it's kinda smart that 2 of them are all about the characters using their heads. Sokka's airship slice and Katara freezing Azula in place. That's logical thinking. Making Aang's finale one that's a bit more out there is kind of earned that way. These episodes also have some of the boldest animation and music scores in the entire show. How often do you see the camera moving through 3D space in 2D animation? Almost never, because it's incredibly difficult and expensive to do, but they did it. Using the music to create a glaring contrast between the Comet-enhanced Agni Kai and the other 2 is another stroke of brilliance, because it creates juxtaposition. The other 2 fights are loud, but this one is muted. And the music just highlights the tragedy of these 2 siblings agreeing to a fight to the death, a fitting conclusion to Azula's descent into madness. Of course, it doesn't get that far, but they didn't know that going in. In short, these 4 episodes have it all. The emotion, the drama, the action, the music, the animation. It's a fitting end to a gigantic epic of a story that will endure for generations to come. And if that's not worthy of the number 1 spot on the list, I don't know what is. And that's it. Quick note on the runners-up. If you're wondering if there were any, well, basically all of the episodes we didn't mention. Except for you, Great Divide. Nobody likes you. It's very difficult to pick just 7, so do be sure to let us know your favorite episode in the comments below, and while you're there, be sure to like and subscribe for more great content every week. And remember, Frederator loves you!